My goodness, Marcus, what are you doing with this lady after everything we've been through? Baby, who is this woman?
What the hell are you doing here? How did you find me?
She gave him everything, her time, her tears, her whole heart, while he quietly gave his soul to someone else. What she did when she found out changed all of their lives forever. There is a particular kind of pain that does not arrive all at once. It does not knock on your door with a loud and dramatic entrance. It seeps in slowly, quietly, the way cold air finds the cracks in an old window frame, settling into your bones before you even realize you are shivering. Camille Jasper knew that pain better than most. She had been living inside of it for nearly 2 years. Though she would not have called it pain back then. She would have called it love. She would have called it patience. She would have called it faith in a man she believed was worth every ounce of waiting she had poured into him. Marcus Delaney was the kind of man who filled a room without even trying. He stood 6'2" with shoulders broad, enough to carry the weight of every dream Camille had ever whispered into the dark. He had a voice that moved like warm honey over gravel, smooth and deep and unhurried, and a smile that had a way of making everything around it go quiet. He was the son of Robert and Gloria Delaney, a well-known family in Atlanta's West End community, respected in their church, known at every cookout, and connected to nearly every important name on the southwest side of the city. Marcus had grown up understanding what it meant to carry a name, and for a long time he had carried it with something close to dignity. Camille had met him at a fundraiser for the Marcus Garvey Community Center on a Thursday evening in late September. She remembered the way the string lights above the courtyard caught the side of his face when he laughed at something his cousin said. She remembered thinking he looked like something out of a painting, easy and golden and warm. She had not gone there looking for love. She had gone there because her best friend, Tamara, had dragged her out of her apartment after 3 weeks of watching her isolate following a career setback that had knocked the wind out of her. Tamara always said that Camille healed better in the presence of community, and on that particular evening, Tamara had been right, though not in the way either of them expected. Marcus had introduced himself with confidence that was not arrogance, just the settled ease of a man who knew his own name. He asked about her work, listened without checking his phone, and laughed at the right moments. By the end of the evening, he had her number, and by the following weekend, they had shared their first meal at a soul food spot on Ralph David Abernathy Boulevard that his grandmother had been going to since 1974. Everything about those early days felt warm and full of promise. Everything felt like a beginning. What Camille did not know, what she could not have seen from where she was standing in that golden light with those string lights overhead and his voice filling every quiet space inside her, was that Marcus Delaney had a habit of beginning things he did not know how to finish. He had a talent for making people feel chosen, feel seen, feel like the most important person in whatever room he happened to occupy at any given moment. And that talent, though it looked like love, was something closer to reflex. He had learned it so young and practiced it so long that even he had stopped being able to tell the difference. Camille learned quickly that loving Marcus meant learning to wait. He was a man with a schedule that never quite had room for her at its center. He was always working on something, always building something, always promising that once this project was done, once this contract came through, once things slowed down just a little, he would show up the way she deserved. And she believed him. She believed him because she loved him, and because the moments when he did show up were extraordinary, enough to make the long silences in between feel almost worth it. Almost. She worked as a marketing director for a mid-size nonprofit focused on educational equity in underserved Atlanta neighborhoods. Her days were full, her purpose was clear, and she was good at what she did. She poured the same intensity into her work that she poured into everything, the same focused, unflinching devotion. People who knew Camille said she was the kind of woman who made things happen, the kind who saw a problem and walked toward it, rather than around it. She was not naive. She was not soft in the way people sometimes assumed a woman who loved deeply must be soft. She was clear-eyed and capable and deeply, stubbornly committed to the things she believed in. And she believed in Marcus. Her mother, Denise Jasper, had her reservations from the beginning. Denise was a retired school teacher from Decatur who had raised Camille and her younger brother alone after their father passed when Camille was 11. She had a way of reading people that went beyond instinct, something built from years of watching children tell the truth with their behavior even when their words said something else entirely. She had watched Marcus at Sunday dinner, watched the way his eyes moved when he thought no one was paying attention, watched the way he answered questions, with just enough warmth to satisfy, but never quite enough substance to settle. After he left that first evening, Denise had sat across from her daughter at the kitchen table and said, very quietly, that she hoped Camille was not confusing devotion with potential. Camille had smiled and told her mother she knew what she was doing. And she had meant it. She had truly meant it. The second year of loving Marcus Delaney was harder than the first, though Camille spent a significant amount of energy convincing herself otherwise. The calls became shorter. The dates became less frequent. There were stretches of days where she would send a message and wait, hours for a response that came back, brief and distracted, full of apology that felt practiced rather than felt. She told herself he was under pressure. She told herself the project he was managing downtown was demanding more than either of them had anticipated. She told herself that love was not always convenient, that it required a particular kind of strength to hold on through the seasons that were not warm. Tamara watched all of this with the careful, pained attention of a woman who loves her friend too much to lie, and too much to tell the whole truth before the friend is ready to hear it. Tamara was a nurse with a direct manner and an enormous heart. The kind of woman who held your hand in the hard moments and told you the truth in the quiet ones. She had watched Camille reorganize her weekends around Marcus's unpredictable availability. She had watched Camille decline invitations, cancel plans, and rearrange her life in small, but accumulating, ways to make room for a man who never seemed to make the same adjustments in return. One evening in late October, Tamara sat across from Camille at their usual table at the back of a wine bar near Little 5 Points. The music was low, the lighting was amber, and Camille was in the middle of explaining why she had turned down an invitation to spend a long weekend in Savannah with a group of colleagues because Marcus had said he might have some free time that weekend. Tamara set down her glass. She looked at Camille for a long moment before she spoke. She said very gently but without flinching that she needed to ask her something. She asked Camille when the last time was that Marcus had rearranged anything in his life for her. The question landed the way a stone lands in still water, spreading outward, touching everything. Camille opened her mouth and then closed it again. She looked down at the table and felt something shift quietly beneath her. Some floor she had not known she was standing on beginning, in that moment, to tremble. She did not have an answer. And the silence that followed that, realization was louder than anything she had heard in a very long time. Hey, if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. It means a lot. Every scene, every twist, every bit of emotion you just saw took hours of hard work to bring to life. And your subscription is the best way to show your support. By hitting that subscribe button, you're not just staying with us, you're helping these stories continue. And trust me, what happens next is going to leave you speechless. So don't miss out. The journey isn't over yet. The days that followed that evening at the wine bar were strange and interior for Camille. She went to work. She answered emails. She sat in meetings and spoke with clarity and purpose about campaign strategies and community outreach timelines. She laughed at the right moments in conversations and remembered to ask her colleagues about their weekends and their children and their lives. On the outside, she looked exactly like herself. On the inside, she was turning Tamara's question over and over like a stone she had found in her pocket, smooth and heavy and impossible to ignore now that she had noticed it was there. When the last time was that Marcus had rearranged anything for her. She kept returning to it. She searched her memory. The way you search a house, you are certain you left something valuable in, moving from room to room, opening drawers, checking corners, lifting things to look beneath them. She found moments she had once read as sacrifice. A Saturday, he had cut a golf outing short to meet her for dinner, though he had arrived distracted and left early. A weekend trip they had taken to Savannah, the previous spring that he had agreed to after she brought it up 3 separate times, across 6 weeks. A birthday dinner he had planned that turned out to have been organized almost entirely by his cousin, Jerome, because Marcus had run out of time to handle the details himself. She had cataloged these things as proof of his love. She had held them up in her own mind like evidence, like receipts, pulling them out whenever the doubts got loud enough to demand attention. Now, sitting with Tamara's question still ringing in her ears, she looked at those same moments again, and they looked different. They did not disappear entirely. Marcus had been present in them, genuinely so, and she did not think he was a cruel man or a dishonest one in any simple or deliberate way. But presence and priority were not the same thing, and she was beginning to understand that she had spent 2 years treating them as though they were. She did not call Marcus that week. She told herself it was because she was busy, because the end of the quarter at work was demanding, because she needed to focus. But the truth she turned away from each time it stepped into the light, was that she was afraid of what she would find if she looked too closely. She was afraid that the distance she had been explaining away for months was not circumstantial. She was afraid it was intentional, and she was not yet ready to live in a world where that was true. Marcus called her on a Thursday evening, which was unusual. He typically texted. His voice on the other end of the line was warm in the familiar way, easy and unhurried, and for a moment she felt herself relax into it the way you relax into a song you have loved for a long time. He asked how she was doing. He asked about the campaign she had been working on. He said he had been thinking about her and that they should get together soon. Maybe that weekend if things opened up on his end. She said that sounded good. She said she would be around. She said she looked forward to it. Every word came out the way it always had, smooth and accommodating and warm. And when she hung up the phone, she sat in her car in the parking garage beneath her office building for 11 minutes without moving. She was performing the relationship. She had not noticed when it started. The way you do not notice. Yourself adjusting your posture until someone points out, you have been holding your shoulders at your ears. But she could feel it clearly now. The naturalness had drained out of it at some point she could not precisely identify. And what remained required effort in a way that love was not supposed to require. Not this kind of effort. Not the effort of managing your own instincts, suppressing your own questions, editing yourself in real time to avoid disrupting a piece that was already, if she was honest, more performance than reality. It was Jerome, Marcus's cousin, who cracked the surface of everything without meaning to. Jerome was a gregarious and well-meaning man who worked in real estate and moved through Atlanta's social landscape with the ease of someone who had never met a stranger. He and Camille had always gotten along well, sharing a sharp humor and a mutual love of old-school R&B and strong coffee. He called her on a Friday afternoon, cheerful and casual, asking if she was coming to the thing at Marcus's place the following Saturday, the small gathering Marcus was putting together. Camille paused. She kept her voice even. She said she was not sure she had heard about it yet. Jerome went quiet for just a half second. The kind of pause that lasts less than a breath but contains everything. Before he recovered and said Marcus had probably just not gotten around to mentioning it, that it was nothing major, just a few people. He moved the conversation forward with practiced ease and wrapped it up quickly, and when they hung up, Camille sat with the phone in her hand and felt the floor tremble again. Harder this time. Marcus was having people over. He had not told her. He was having people over to his home. People close enough to make it worth organizing, and it had not occurred to him to mention it to the woman. He had been calling his partner for nearly 2 years. She sat with that for a long time before she did anything. Then she opened her laptop and did something she had never done before. Something she had always told herself she would not do because she trusted him, because trust was the foundation, because she was not that kind of woman. She went to his social media. She had been in the habit of keeping her browsing of his, accounts light and occasional, the way you keep your hand close to a flame without letting it touch you. She had never gone looking. Now she went looking. She scrolled slowly and deliberately, moving back through weeks of posts she had scrolled past without examining, through tagged photos, through comments, and then she found it. Not in any obvious or dramatic form. Not a declaration or an announcement. Just a pattern. The kind of pattern that becomes visible only when you are looking for it, with clear and undefended eyes. There was a woman who appeared in the margins of his life online with a frequency and familiarity that went beyond coincidence. Her name was Diane Whitfield. She was a landscape architect based in Buckhead, poised and well-composed in her profile, the kind of woman whose life looked curated without looking effortful. She had commented on 3 of Marcus's posts over the past 2 months. Brief and warm comments, the kind that sounded casual but landed with intention. He had liked every photo on her page going back 4 months. Not the scattered occasional likes of an acquaintance. Every photo. Methodically and consistently. The way you engage with something you are paying close attention to. Camille's chest was very still. She felt her breathing slow in the way it does not when you are calm. But when you are absorbing something your body recognizes before your mind catches up. She did not cry. She did not slam the laptop shut. She sat there in the quiet of her living room with the lamp burning low beside her and the city moving outside her window. And she made a decision. She was not going to spiral. She was not going to call Marcus in a panic or confront him without information. She was going to find out what she was actually dealing with before she moved a single inch in any direction. Because Camille Jasper had not survived. Everything she had survived by reacting before she understood. And she was not about to start now. There is a difference between suspicion and knowledge, and Camille understood that difference with the precision of a woman who had spent her career building cases from evidence rather than assumption. Suspicion could be wrong. Suspicion could be the product of insecurity, of past wounds coloring present reality, of fear dressed up as intuition. She had seen too many people burn good things down because they could not tell the difference between a red flag and a shadow. She was not going to be that woman. She was going to be certain before she was anything else. She started small and she started smart. She began paying attention to the texture of her conversations with Marcus in a way she had not allowed herself to before. Not suspicious listening, not the anxious monitoring of a woman who has already decided what she is going to find, but the careful, patient attention of someone who is learning to read a map she previously only glanced at. She noticed that he had stopped mentioning his weekends in any detail. Where he once narrated his Saturdays with the easy looseness of a man with nothing to hide, he now kept those hours vague and summary, broad strokes without specifics. He had been to the gym. He had handled some things. He had caught up with some people. The language was the language of a man who had learned to be economical with detail. She noticed that his phone, which had once lived face-up on tables and countertops with the careless confidence of someone who did not think twice about it, was now always face down or tucked away, present but not visible. She noticed that he had started responding to her messages with a new kind of consistency, not because he was more attentive, but because the responses came too quickly and too smoothly, as though he was managing a channel rather than having a conversation. There was a performance quality to it that she recognized now, because she had been performing too, and performers can always spot each other if they look carefully enough. She called her cousin Renee, who lived in Buckhead and moved in a professional circle that occasionally overlapped with the landscape and design community in the city. Renee was discreet and loyal and sharp as a blade kept clean, and she owed Camille a debt of gratitude that went back 7 years to a situation Camille had helped her navigate with grace and silence. Camille did not tell Renee everything. She told her enough. She gave her Diane Whitfield's name and her profession and asked, with the measured calm of someone making a business inquiry, whether Renee knew her or knew anyone who did. Renee said she would ask around. She said she would be careful. She called back in 4 days. What Renee told her was not explosive. It was not a confession or a scandal. It was in some ways more unsettling than either of those things because of how ordinary it sounded. Diane Whitfield was well regarded in her field. She had a small firm, a good reputation, and a social life that was active and well-connected. She had been seen with Marcus Delaney at 2 events in the past 3 months, once at a private dinner for a development project in Midtown, and once at a jazz evening at a gallery in Inman Park. On both occasions, they had arrived separately and left separately. On both occasions, they had spent most of the evening close to each other. A mutual acquaintance of Renee's, who had been at the gallery evening, said they had looked comfortable together in the way that people look. Comfortable when they have spent real time in each other's company. Camille thanked her cousin and ended the call and sat in the quiet for a long time. She did not go to pieces. She had expected herself to, had braced for the particular collapse that she imagined would follow confirmation that her fears were rooted in something real. But what came instead was something closer to clarity. Cool and still and surprisingly focused. The fog she had been moving through for months, the one she had mistaken for patience and called devotion, began to lift, and what she could see beneath it was the shape of the past. 2 years laid out with a honesty she had not previously allowed herself. She had been so committed to the version of Marcus she had fallen in love with, at that fundraiser under the string lights that she had refused to update. Her understanding of him as the evidence changed. She had kept fitting new information into old frameworks, explaining away the distance, reframing the neglect, translating his absence into the language of circumstance rather than choice. It was not stupidity. She knew that. It was not weakness in the simple sense. It was the particular loyalty of a woman who loves with her whole self and cannot easily accept that the person she loves is not who she believed him to be. But loyalty, she was beginning to understand, had to have a limit, and she had reached hers. She thought about what her mother had said at that kitchen table. She heard Tamra's voice asking her the question that had cracked the surface of everything. She thought about Jerome's half-second pause on the phone, that tiny fracture in his cheerfulness that had told her more than he intended. She thought about all the small moments she had cataloged as love and wondered, how many of them? Marcus had been somewhere else inside, even when he was standing right in front of her. She wondered how long Diane Whitfield had been a presence in his life. Not on social media where the evidence was clear, but in the real and interior landscape of his attention, the place Camille had believed she occupied fully and alone. She pulled out a notebook. She wrote nothing dramatic in it, no manifesto of pain, no list of grievances. She wrote 3 questions and she wrote them plainly. What did she know for certain? What did she need to find out? And what was she going to do when she knew everything she needed to know? She answered the first question with facts, and the second with a plan, and the third with a silence she let sit on the page without filling it yet, because that answer would depend on what kind of woman she decided to be on the other side of all of this. She had always believed she was the kind of woman who did not run from hard things. She was about to find out if that was true. She called Marcus that evening and asked him if they could have dinner the following Friday. Her voice was warm and easy and completely steady. He said yes without hesitation, and he sounded genuinely pleased. And she smiled at the phone after they hung up with an expression that had nothing of happiness in it, and everything of resolve. She had 1 week to gather the last pieces of what she needed to understand, before she sat across from the man she had loved for 2 years and decided what truth looked like between them. She spent that week living her life with a precision and intentionality that surprised even her. She went to work and she was excellent at it. She had dinner with her mother on Tuesday and was present and attentive and laughed at all the right stories. She had coffee with Tamara on Wednesday morning and said only that things were becoming clearer, that she was working through some things, that she would have more to say soon. Tamara looked at her with the careful attention of someone reading weather and asked if she was okay. Camille said she was better than okay. She said she was becoming herself again. On Thursday evening, the evening before the dinner with Marcus, she dressed and drove herself to the gallery in Inman Park, where Renee had told her the jazz evening had taken place. She did not know what she was looking for exactly. She sat at the bar and ordered a glass of water and looked at the space. The warm lighting, the artwork on the walls, the tables arranged for intimacy. She tried to imagine Marcus here with Diane Whitfield. The ease of them, the comfort that Renee's contact had described. She sat with that image and let herself feel it fully. The grief of it, the sharpness of it, without looking away. Then she paid for her water and she left. And she drove home and she slept better than she had in months. Friday arrived the way significant days often do, quietly and without announcement, dressed in the ordinary clothes of any other morning. Camille woke before her alarm, which had been happening more frequently in recent weeks as her mind began operating with the focused urgency of someone preparing for something important. She lay still for a few minutes in the early gray light of her bedroom, listening to the city begin its day outside her window, the distant sound of traffic building on the boulevard below, a dog barking 2 floors down, the particular stillness of an Atlanta morning before the heat settled in, and made everything heavier. She had chosen the restaurant herself. That was deliberate. She had chosen Fern. a quiet and elegant spot in Midtown that she had been to several times before, a place with good lighting and well-spaced tables and the kind of ambient sound that allowed for genuine conversation without requiring you to raise your voice. She had made the reservation under her own name. She had confirmed it twice. The details mattered to her now in a way they had not always mattered, because she understood that the frame of an evening shapes what happens inside it, and she needed this evening to be on her terms from the first moment to the last. She spent the day at work with a quality of focus that her assistant noticed and commented on, saying she seemed different, sharper somehow, more settled. Camille smiled and said she had just been sleeping better. That was true enough. She finished 2 reports she had been carrying for weeks, cleared her inbox to a number that would have seemed impossible a month ago, and left the office at 5:30 with the clean, quiet satisfaction of a woman who has put her house in order before a storm. She went home. She showered. She stood in front of her closet for exactly 4 minutes before choosing a deep, burgundy-wrapped dress that her mother had told her once made her look like someone who had decided something. She wore it with small gold earrings and the perfume she saved for occasions that required her full self. She arrived at the restaurant 8 minutes before Marcus did, which was also deliberate. She wanted to be seated when he walked in. She wanted the psychological landscape of the evening, arranged correctly from the start, herself already present and settled, him arriving into a space she had already claimed. She ordered sparkling water and sat with it and did not look at her phone. She looked at the room and she breathed and she reminded herself of the 3 questions she had written in her notebook: what she knew, what she needed to find out, and what she would do when she knew everything. She had answers to the first 2 now. The third was what tonight was for. Marcus walked in at 7:13 with the ease that was so characteristic of him, unhurried and warm and filling the room in that particular way he had. He was well dressed, a charcoal blazer over a fitted black shirt, and he looked good. She registered that with the clear-eyed honesty she was extending to everything now. He looked good, and he looked glad to see her, and he crossed the room with his smile already opened and bent to kiss her cheek before he sat down. She smiled back. She asked how his drive over had been. He said traffic on Peachtree was a whole situation as always. They both laughed. The opening was easy and warm and felt almost like it used to feel almost. They ordered. They talked about her work first, which she appreciated because it meant she could be engaged and genuine without having to manage herself too carefully. She talked about the new initiative her organization was launching in partnership with 3 Atlanta public schools, an after-school program focused on media literacy and creative expression for middle schoolers. Her eyes lit up when she talked about it because they always did, because this was the work she had chosen and believed in, and Marcus listened with attention that seemed real, nodding at the right moments, asking a question that showed he had actually heard what she said rather than simply waited for his turn. She thought, watching him, that this was what had made everything so difficult. He was not a bad man performing goodness. He was a genuinely warm and capable man who was also, in some fundamental way, not fully present in the life they were supposedly building together. Those 2 things could be true at once. She had spent 2 years refusing to hold both of them simultaneously, choosing one or the other depending on what the moment required. She was done choosing. She was going to hold all of it now. She let the conversation breathe for a while after the food arrived. They talked about his mother, who had been having some health challenges with her knee. They talked about Jerome's new listing in Cascade Heights, which Marcus described with the proud amusement of someone who finds their cousin's ambition both admirable and slightly exhausting. They talked about a documentary they had both watched separately and had differing opinions on, and the disagreement was lively and fun and reminded her, painfully, of who they had been in the beginning. She let herself feel that too. She did not push the feeling away. Then, when the table had been cleared and the coffee had arrived and the evening had reached that particular settled quality that comes after a good meal, she set down her cup and looked at him directly and said she needed to talk to him about something. His expression shifted in a way so small that most people would have missed it entirely. She did not miss it. It was the shift of a man who has been expecting a conversation and has not yet decided how he is going to have it. She did not raise her voice. She did not produce evidence like a prosecutor approaching a witness. She simply told him what she had observed. Plainly and without embellishment, the growing distance, the uninvited gathering at his home, the pattern she had noticed on his social media, the name Diane Whitfield, the two events, the 4 months of attention she had traced with her own eyes. She laid it out the way she would have laid out a campaign strategy at work, clearly, sequentially, without emotion that was not earned, and without drama that was not necessary. She told him she was not there to accuse him of anything she could not support. She was there because she deserved the truth, and she was no longer willing to wait for him to offer it voluntarily. The silence that followed was long enough to be its own answer. Marcus looked at the table. He looked at his hands. He looked up at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before, something that lived between shame and relief. The face of a man who has been carrying something heavy and has just been told he can set it down, though the setting down is its own kind of reckoning. He said her name. He said it the way people say the name of someone they have hurt, quietly and with the full weight of what they know they are about to say pressing behind it. And then he told her. Not everything at once. Not in a clean or organized way, but in the halting, painful manner of a man who has been dishonest long enough that honesty no longer comes easily. Diane Whitfield was not nothing. He had met her 7 months ago at a professional event. It had started as a friendship, he said, though even as the word left his mouth, something in his expression acknowledged its inadequacy. It had become something else. He had not meant for it to. He had not planned it. He had not known how to stop it once it started, and he had not known how to tell Camille, and he had convinced himself, in the way that people convince themselves of things they need to believe, that he was protecting her. Camille listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she asked him one question. She asked him if he loved Diane Whitfield. The question cost her something to ask. She could feel exactly what it cost. But she asked it anyway, because she needed to know and because she had decided. She was done paying for answers that were already hers to have. Marcus looked at her for a long time. And then, with the defeated honesty of a man who has run out of room to maneuver, he said he did not know. He said he thought he might. He said he was sorry, and she believed that he meant it. And she also understood that sorry and different were not the same word. She picked up her bag from the back of her chair. She stood. She looked at him one final time across the table, and she told him, very quietly, that she hoped he figured out what he wanted. She told him that she already knew what she wanted and that it was not this. She told him she deserved someone who was certain. Then she walked out of Fern Restaurant on a Friday evening in Atlanta with her head level and her shoulders straight and the burgundy dress moving around, her like something that had already made up its mind. She cried in her car for exactly 6 minutes. Then she started the engine and drove home. Grief, when it is real and earned, does not follow a schedule. It does not arrive in the ordered stages that books describe and therapists outline with the reassuring clarity of a map. It arrives on its own terms, in its own sequence, sometimes all at once, and sometimes in pieces so small you barely register them, until you reach for something familiar and find it gone. Camille had known grief before. She had sat with it at 11 years old beside her father's casket in a church on Flat Shoals Avenue while the choir sang and the light came through the stained glass in colors she would remember for the rest of her life. She had sat with it again at 26 when a relationship she had believed in completely had ended in a way that taught her more about herself than she had wanted to learn at the time. She knew grief's texture. She knew how it moved. And she knew, with the hard-won wisdom of a woman who had survived her own interior seasons, that the only way through it was through it. She gave herself the weekend. That was the agreement she made with herself on the drive home from the restaurant. The one she held to with the same discipline she brought to everything else in her life. She would have the weekend to feel all of it without management, or editing, or the performance of being fine. She called Tamara from her driveway and said 4 words. She said he confirmed everything. Tamara did not say I told you so, because Tamara was not that kind of friend. She said she was on her way. She showed up 20 minutes later with 2 containers of soup from the Jamaican spot on Candler Road and a bottle of red wine and the particular quality of presence that only a true friend can offer, the kind that does not try to fix anything or fill the silence with words. It does not need to contain, They sat on Camille's living room floor with the soup and the wine and the low music, playing from the Bluetooth speaker on the bookshelf, and Camille talked and Tamara listened, and occasionally. Tamara said something true and small that landed exactly right. At some point, Camille cried, not the 6-minute cry from the car, which had been necessary and contained, but the longer, less organized kind. The kind that moves through you the way a storm moves through a landscape, spending itself fully before it passes. Tamara sat beside her through all of it and did not hurry any part of it along. When the crying was finished, Camille felt hollowed out, in the way that is not emptiness, but clearing, the way a field looks after a controlled burn. Stark and exposed, but ready for something new. She slept that night better than she had in months. She woke on Saturday morning to pale, October light filling her bedroom and the smell of the coffee. Tamara had already started in the kitchen, because Tamara had stayed, sleeping on the couch without being asked. Because she understood that some nights, a person should not spend alone. Camille lay in bed for a few minutes and took inventory of herself the way you check for damage after an accident. Carefully and honestly, she was sad. She was also, underneath the sadness, something that surprised her. She was relieved. The not knowing was over. The managing and the explaining and the performing were over. The long vigil of hoping a man would choose her the way she had chosen him was over. And though the end of waiting is not the same as happiness, it is its own kind of release. She did not contact Marcus in the days that followed. He sent a message on Sunday evening, careful and remorseful, saying he knew she needed space, and that he was truly sorry for how things had unfolded, and that he hoped she was okay. She read it twice. She did not respond, not out of cruelty or strategy, but because she genuinely had nothing to say to him, yet that would be useful for either of them. The time for words between them that meant something had passed for now. And she understood that silence was sometimes the most honest response available. She went back to work on Monday with the clean, purposeful energy of someone who has resolved something. Her team noticed, though they could not have named precisely what was different. She was warmer and more direct simultaneously, fully present in meetings in a way that generated a quality of attention from the people around her. Her executive director, a measured and perceptive woman named Dr. Patricia Okafor, stopped her after a strategy session on Tuesday afternoon and told her the presentation she had given was the best she had seen from her in a year. Camille thanked her and meant it, and walked back to her office understanding that the best work she did had always come from the clearest version of herself, and that she had been operating at a fraction of that clarity for longer than she wanted to admit. She called her mother on Wednesday evening. Denise answered on the second ring the way she always did, as though she had been waiting, though she never admitted to waiting. Camille told her everything, not the abbreviated version she had been offering her mother in recent months, but the full account. The distance and the gathering and Diane, Whitfield and the dinner at Fern and the question she had asked and the answer she had received. Denise listened without interrupting, which was its own form of love, because Denise Jasper was a woman who had opinions and was not typically shy about sharing them. When Camille finished, her mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said she was proud of her. She said it simply and directly, and without the ornamentation of extra words. Camille felt it land in the deepest part of her chest. Denise said one more thing before they ended the call. She said that a man who does not know how to choose you when you are standing right in front of him is not going to suddenly develop that knowledge when you are gone. She said that was not cynicism, that was observation, and there was a difference. She said Camille's job now was not to wait for Marcus Delaney to become the man she had believed he was. Her job was to become more fully the woman she already was, and let that be enough. Camille wrote that down in her notebook after they hung up. She underlined the last part twice. The weeks that followed were not easy in any simple or uncomplicated way, but they had a quality of forward motion that the preceding months had lacked entirely. She began going back to the things she had quietly set aside to make room for a relationship that had not made room for her in return. She went back to the pottery class she had dropped in the spring. She accepted the invitation to the long weekend in Savannah that she had previously declined, and she went with her colleagues and walked along the waterfront in the early morning light and ate well and laughed genuinely and came home, feeling more like herself than she had in a long time. She ran into Jerome, at a coffee shop in the West End on a Thursday morning in mid-November. He saw her first, and his expression moved through several things quickly. Before settling on something warm and slightly guilty, he said her name. She smiled and said his. He asked how she was doing, and she told him honestly that she was doing well, that she was figuring things out, that she appreciated him always having been decent to her. He looked relieved and sad simultaneously. He said Marcus was going through some things. Camille said she imagined he was. Jerome opened his mouth as though he was going to say something further, and then seemed to think better of it. They said their goodbyes with genuine warmth, and she walked to her car with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who has exited a situation with her dignity fully intact. What she did not know yet, what was still assembling itself in the world, outside her, careful and rebuilding life, was that Marcus Delaney's situation was more complicated than Jerome's careful vagueness had suggested. Diane Whitfield had not simply stepped into the space Camille had occupied. She had arrived with her own clarity and her own expectations and her own understanding of what she required from a man who wanted to be in her life, and Marcus, who had always been better at beginning things than sustaining them, was discovering that Diane's particular brand of patience was considerably shorter than Camille's had been. The universe, Camille's grandmother used to say, has a long memory and a precise hand. It does not forget what was owed or to whom. It simply takes its time about collecting. Camille did not know this yet, but she was about to find out. There is a particular kind of woman who does not announce her transformation. She does not post about it or perform it for the people who knew her before. She simply becomes, quietly and deliberately, more fully herself, and the world around her eventually notices the way you notice a change in light. Not the moment it shifts, but the moment. You look up and everything looks different than it did before. Camille Jasper was becoming that woman, not because she had decided to reinvent herself in the dramatic fashion that heartbreak sometimes inspires, not because she was building herself into something designed to make Marcus Delaney regret what he had lost. Though that thought had visited her once or twice in her more human moments, she was becoming herself because she had spent 2 years becoming smaller to fit inside a relationship that was not expanding to hold her, and now that the walls of that particular room had come down, she was remembering what it felt like to take up the space that had always been hers. She threw herself into the media literacy program with the full force of her restored attention, the initiative, which she had been managing at half capacity for months, while the other half of her mind lived in the anxious maintenance of her relationship with Marcus, now received everything she had. She redesigned the curriculum, framework in collaboration with 3 of Atlanta's most innovative educators. She secured 2 new corporate sponsors through pitches that her executive director later described as among the most compelling she had witnessed in 15 years of nonprofit leadership. She hired a young woman named Brianna Cole, fresh from Spelman with a fire in her eyes and a mind that moved fast, and she mentored her with the kind of invested attention that she had once reserved for a man who had not known what to do with it. The program launched in January with a ceremony at Frederick Douglass High School that drew coverage from 2 local media outlets and a congratulatory letter from the district superintendent. Camille stood at the podium in the school's auditorium and looked out at the faces of 43 middle schoolers who were about to spend the next 6 months learning how to tell their own stories, and she felt something open in her chest that had been closed for a long time. She spoke without notes. She talked about the power of knowing your own voice, about what it means to tell the truth of your own experience with clarity and without apology, about the particular strength required to author your own narrative. Rather than waiting for someone else to write it for you, the students were quiet in the way young people are quiet. When something real is being said to them, not the restless performed, quiet of obligation, but the genuine stillness of recognition. Tamara, who had come to the event and was sitting in the 3rd row, sent her a text message that she read afterward in the parking lot. It said simply, "There she is." Camille stood in the January cold with her coat open and read those 3 words, and felt them settle somewhere, permanent inside her. It was in February, 4 months after the dinner at Fern, that the first piece of news about Marcus reached her. And it reached her the way most things reach you in a community as interconnected as theirs, sideways and without announcement, through a conversation that was about something else entirely. She was at a birthday gathering for a mutual friend named Solange, held at a rooftop venue in Old Fourth Ward on a Saturday evening when the winter had briefly loosened its grip and the air smelled almost like the edge of spring. She was talking to a woman named Priya, an architect who moved in professional circles that occasionally overlapped with the development and design world that Marcus occupied. When Priya mentioned, in the casual offhand manner of someone sharing news they assume is already known, that she had heard Marcus Delaney had parted ways with his primary client on the downtown project, Camille kept her expression neutral and her voice easy. She said she had not heard that. Priya said it was apparently a significant falling out, something to do with missed deadlines and a breakdown in communication that had cost the project considerable time and money. She said the word around the professional community was that Marcus had been distracted for several months, that his attention had not been where it needed to be, and that the client, a development firm with a reputation for unforgiving standards, had ended the contract without ceremony and with consequences that were going to be difficult to absorb. Priya said it with the neutral sympathy of someone who is not personally involved but understands the weight of professional failure in a community where reputation travels fast. Camille said that was unfortunate and meant it, because she was not a woman who found satisfaction in the professional suffering of a man she had once loved, but she filed the information away with the careful attention she brought to everything now. Because it was a piece of a picture, she was beginning to be able to see more completely the picture of what Marcus Delaney's life looked like on the other side of the choice he had made. What she learned over the following weeks, through the interconnected social and professional landscape of Atlanta's black community, where nothing stayed private for very long among people who were paying attention, was that Diane Whitfield had not been the uncomplicated answer Marcus had perhaps imagined she would be. Diane was a woman with her own architecture, her own interior standards, her own non-negotiable requirements, and she had communicated those requirements to Marcus with a directness that he had apparently not anticipated. She had not been interested in a man who was mid-extraction from another relationship. She had not been interested in the guilt and the distraction and the emotional residue that Marcus had arrived carrying, having never properly processed the ending of what he and Camille had been. She had given him, according to Renee, who heard it from someone who knew Diane's closest friend, 3 months to get himself together. 3 months to close what needed to be closed, to do whatever interior work a man needed to do to arrive in a new relationship, as something close to whole. Marcus had spent those 3 months managing his professional crisis and the social fallout of a breakup in a community where everyone knew everyone. And he had not, apparently, done the interior work. He had arrived at the end of Diane's 3 months, the same way he had arrived at the dinner at Fern, present in body and somewhere else in the part of himself that mattered most. Diane Whitfield had ended things in March with the clean, decisive efficiency of a woman who knows her own value and does not negotiate against it. She had told him, according to the account, that eventually made its way through the network of the city's connected women, that she had not waited years for a man and she was not about to start. She wished him well. She meant it, and she moved on with the particular grace of a woman who had made a decision she had no intention of revisiting. Marcus was left with neither. That was the part that the universe, with its long memory and precise hand, had arranged with a tidiness that felt almost architectural. The woman who had loved him with her whole self for 2 years had walked out of a restaurant in a Burgundy dress and rebuilt her life with a thoroughness that left no vacancy for his return. The woman he had believed might be the answer had assessed him honestly and found that he was not yet the question she was asking, and he was left standing in the space between those two realities with the particular loneliness of a man who has gambled on certainty he did not actually possess. He reached out to Camille in late March. Not a long message, not an elaborate apology, not the kind of grand gesture that movies suggest is available to men in his position. Just a simple message that said he had been thinking about her and hoped she was well, and that he owed her more than an apology but wanted to start there if she would allow it. She read it 3 times. She sat with it for 2 days. Then she wrote back 4 sentences. She told him she appreciated him reaching out. She told him she genuinely wished him well. She told him she was doing better than she had been in years. And she told him she was not available for what he was looking for. not because she was angry, but because she had learned something important about the value of her own time, and she intended to honor that knowledge going forward. She pressed send and set her phone face down on her desk and went back to the grant proposal she had been working on, and she did not think about his response, because she had not sent the message to receive one. She had sent it because it was the truth, and because she was a woman who had decided to tell the truth from now on, to herself first, and then to everyone else in whatever order they required it. What she did not yet know was that the story was not finished, that the universe's precision extended further than she had seen so far, that something was coming that none of them, not Marcus, not Diane, not even Tamara with her careful and watchful attention, had anticipated. Something that would change the landscape of all of their lives in ways that would take years to fully understand. It started with a phone call she received on a Tuesday morning in April, while she was sitting at her desk with her third coffee of the day and the spring light coming through her office window in a way that made everything look briefly, unreasonably hopeful. The phone call came from a number she did not recognize, which was not unusual given the nature of her work. Since donors and partners and community stakeholders called from new numbers regularly, and she had long ago trained herself not to let unfamiliar digits go to voicemail when she was in the office and available. She answered on the third ring with the clear and professional warmth she brought to all first contact. Her name and her organization offered cleanly and without hesitation. The voice on the other end was a woman's voice, measured and deliberate, with the particular quality of someone who has rehearsed what they are about to say enough times to have smoothed the nerves out of it, without quite removing the weight. The woman said her name was Vanessa Osei. She said she was a producer with a documentary production company based in Atlanta called Meridian South, a company Camille had heard of peripherally because they had produced two well-regarded short documentaries about Black Atlanta neighborhoods that had screened at film festivals and generated significant community conversation. Vanessa said she had been following the media literacy initiative at Camille's organization for several months, that she had attended the launch at Frederick Douglass High School in January, that she had sat in the auditorium and listened to Camille speak and had known within the first 4 minutes that she had found the center of the story she had been trying to locate for over a year. Camille set down her coffee cup. She asked Vanessa to tell her more. Vanessa said she was developing a feature-length documentary about Black women in Atlanta who were redefining leadership and community impact in the post-pandemic landscape, women who were doing significant work not from positions of inherited power or institutional backing but from the force of their own vision and the communities they had built around them. She said she had interviewed 11 women over the past 14 months and had been looking for the through line, the narrative spine that would hold the film together, the voice and story that would give the documentary its emotional and intellectual center. She said she believed Camille was that center. She said she wanted to meet and talk about what that might look like if Camille was open to the conversation. Camille was quiet for a moment that lasted exactly long enough to be genuine rather than performed. Then she said she was open to the conversation. They agreed to meet the following Thursday at a cafe in Ponce City Market. And when she ended the call, she sat for a full minute looking at the spring light on her office wall before she picked up her phone and sent Tamara a message that said, in its entirety, something is happening, and I think it might be large. Tamara called back in 4 minutes, which was faster than texting ever allowed for the kind of conversation this clearly required. Camille told her about Vanessa Osei and Meridian South and the documentary and the word center, the way Vanessa had said it with a specificity and conviction that did not sound like flattery or recruitment, but like the particular certainty of someone who has been looking for something and recognizes it when it finally appears. Tamara was quiet on the other end for a moment, and then she said, in a voice that carried the full history of their friendship inside it, that she needed Camille to understand something. She said that this was not luck. She said that luck was random and indiscriminate, and did not choose its recipients based on anything except probability. She said what was happening to Camille was the consequence of a woman who had done the work, cleared the noise, found her own center, and stepped into it fully. She said the world responds to that. It always does. It just takes its own time getting around to it. Camille drove to the meeting with Vanessa Osei on Thursday, morning with the same quality of settled focus she had brought to the dinner at Fern. Herself already present before the other person arrived, the psychological landscape arranged correctly from the start. Vanessa was a compact, precise woman in her early 40s with natural hair, and the kind of direct eye contact that signals genuine attention rather than performance. She had a recorder on the table between them, which she asked permission to use, and a notebook she wrote in occasionally with a left-handed slant that Camille found oddly charming. They talked for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Camille had intended to stay for 1 hour. Vanessa asked questions that were not the questions Camille had expected. She did not ask about the program statistics or the corporate partnerships or the metrics that made the initiative look impressive on paper. She asked about why. She asked about the morning. Camille had stood at the podium at Frederick Douglass and spoken, without notes, and what had been moving through her in that moment. She asked about the kind of leadership Camille had watched modeled by the women in her life growing up, her mother, her teachers, the women in her church who organized everything from the ground up, without ever being credited by name. She asked about failure and redirection and the moments that had required Camille to understand herself more clearly than was comfortable. She asked, with the careful and respectful specificity of someone who had done her research about what the past year had taught her about the difference between persistence and attachment. That last question landed with a precision that made Camille look at Vanessa directly for a moment before she answered. She said that was a question she was still working through. She said what she had come to understand was that persistence toward a goal was one of the most powerful forces available to a person, but that persistence within a situation that has stopped serving your growth is just a different name for fear. She said she had spent time confusing the two, and that the uncoupling of them had been one of the more significant interior projects of her adult life. Vanessa wrote something in her notebook without looking down at it, which meant she had been watching Camille's face while she wrote, and Camille respected that enough to note it. By the end of the meeting, the shape of what Vanessa was proposing had become clearer and more significant than Camille had initially understood from the phone call. The documentary was not a minor project. Meridian South had secured funding from 2 prominent foundations and a streaming platform that had expressed strong acquisition, interest pending completion. The film had a theatrical release, strategy for the fall festival circuit. Before the streaming premiere, Camille's participation would not be peripheral or supplementary. It would be structural. Her story and her work and her voice would be one of the primary narrative threads running through the entire film. She drove home from that meeting with the windows down despite the April chill because she needed the air, needed the physical sensation of movement and space to hold the size of what was assembling itself around her. She thought about the woman she had been 18 months ago, reorganizing her weekends around the unpredictable availability of a man who was quietly giving his attention to someone else. She thought about sitting in the parking garage beneath her office building for 11 minutes without moving after a phone call that had felt like performance. She thought about the notebook with the 3 questions and the burgundy dress and the 6 minutes of crying in the car and Tamara on the living room floor and her mother's voice saying her job now was to become more fully the woman she already was. She thought about how none of this, not the program, not the students at Frederick Douglass, not Vanessa Osei sitting across from her with a recorder and a left-handed notebook, none of it would have found her if she had stayed. If she had kept managing herself smaller and explaining away the distance and waiting for a man to choose her who had already, in every way that mattered, chosen someone else. The life she was walking into had required the life she had walked out of. That was not a comfortable thought, and it was not a simple one, but it was true, and she had decided to live inside the truth now, regardless of its shape. She called her mother from the driveway. Denise answered on the second ring. Camille said without preamble that she had something to tell her. She told her everything about Vanessa and Meridian South and the documentary and the streaming platform and the word center. Denise listened without interrupting, which was becoming a more frequent occurrence and which, Camille understood, was its own form of her mother growing too, learning when to hold the space rather than fill it. When Camille finished, Denise was quiet for a moment. Then she said in the voice she used only for things she meant completely that Robert would have been so proud. She said it was the first time in this conversation, the first time in this entire season, that she had invoked Camille's father, and the weight of it moved through Camille like a current, warm and deep and unmistakable. She sat in the car for a while after they hung up, not in the paralyzed stillness of the parking garage 11 minutes, but in the full and breathing quiet of a woman who is sitting inside a moment she wants to remember. The city moved around her in the April evening, lights coming on in windows, a couple walking a dog on the sidewalk, the distant sound of music from somewhere down the block. Atlanta in the spring, alive and layered and full of stories happening simultaneously in every direction, some of them breaking, some of them beginning, some of them arriving at the moment of turn that changes everything that comes after. She did not know yet what Marcus was doing on this particular evening. She did not know that he had heard, through the same interconnected network that carried everything in their world, about the documentary and Meridian South and Camille's role at its center. She did not know what that information had done to him, what room it had entered in him, and what it had rearranged when it arrived. She was not thinking about Marcus. She was thinking about 43 middle schoolers, learning to tell their own stories. She was thinking about her father. She was thinking about Thursday and the call and the recorder and the left-handed notebook and the word center. She was thinking about what it means to arrive, finally and fully, at the life that was always waiting for you, on the other side of the one. You had to be brave enough to leave. The documentary shoot began in May, on a morning that arrived with the particular generosity of Atlanta in early summer. The sky wide and deeply blue, the air carrying the green smell of everything growing at once. The city below it humming with the layered energy of a place that has always known how to reinvent itself without losing what it was. Vanessa Osei arrived at Camille's office at 7:30 with a crew of 4, a cinematographer named Deshawn, whose eye for light was immediately apparent in the careful way he moved through the space, a sound engineer, a production assistant, and a woman named Claire, who handled the logistical architecture of the shoot with a quiet efficiency that Camille recognized and respected as a professional language. She herself spoke fluently. They spent the first morning filming Camille in her workspace, at her desk in conversation with her team, and during a session with the students at one of the partner schools where the media literacy program was now in its 4th month of operation. Camille had worried, privately and briefly, that the presence of cameras would alter something essential about the work, that the students would perform rather than engage, that the natural texture of what happened in those rooms would flatten under observation into something more presentable and less true. That worry dissolved within the first 20 minutes. The students were too absorbed in what they were doing to sustain a performance for long, and what the cameras captured instead was the real thing, a room full of 12 and 13-year-olds discovering, with the particular electricity of genuine revelation, that their experiences and perspectives and stories had weight and form and the capacity to move other people. Camille watched Deshawn's lens follow a girl named Imani as she read aloud a personal essay she had written about her grandmother, and she felt the truth of what Vanessa had been building toward with this film settle into her with a completeness she had not fully anticipated. Vanessa filmed over 6 consecutive weeks, returning to different locations and contexts, following Camille through her work days, accompanying her to a community meeting in Vine City, filming a conversation between Camille and her mother at Denise's kitchen table that lasted 3 hours and which Vanessa later told her was some of the most honest footage she had captured in 4 years of making documentaries. Tamara appeared in the film, briefly and characteristically directly, describing Camille in terms that made Camille laugh out loud when she watched the rough cut months later, saying that her best friend was the kind of woman who walks toward what is hard rather than around it, and that this was both her greatest strength and, historically, occasionally her greatest inconvenience. Camille made Tamara repeat that last line twice when she called her after watching it, and they laughed together in the way of 2 women who have been through enough together to find the hard parts funny in retrospect. It was during the 5th week of filming, on a Wednesday afternoon when the crew had broken for lunch and Camille was sitting alone in her office, reviewing notes for an afternoon session, that Marcus Delaney appeared at the door of her organization's building. She did not know he was coming. He had not called or messaged to ask if he could come, which was either an oversight or a calculation she did not have the energy to analyze. Her assistant, a steady and perceptive young man named Darius, came to her office door and told her there was someone in the lobby asking to see her, and something in the careful neutrality of Darius's tone told her before he said the name. She sat for a moment. Then she told Darius to send him up. She stood when Marcus appeared in the doorway, which was deliberate, because she wanted to receive this conversation on her feet, rather than from behind her desk, standing rather than positioned, present rather than defended. He looked different than he had at Fern in October. He looked like a man who had been through something and had not yet fully processed what it had cost him. The ease that had always characterized his presence was still there, but quieter now, less reflexive, as though he had learned to hold it more carefully after discovering what happened when he had not. He said he knew he should have called. She said yes, he should have. He looked around her office, at the framed photos of the students on her wall, at the campaign materials and the grant documents and the life she had built in the time since. She had walked out of a restaurant in a burgundy dress. He said it looked like things were going well. She said they were. He said he had heard about the documentary. She said she imagined he had. He smiled at that, a smaller and more honest version of the smile she had first seen under string lights at a fundraiser, and she felt the ghost of who they had been to each other move through the room briefly and then settle. He said he had come because he needed to say something to her that a message could not hold correctly. He said he had spent the better part of the past several months understanding things about himself that he should have understood before he cost her 2 years of waiting. He said he had been in therapy, which surprised her enough that she let it show on her face. And he said her expression was fair, that he was surprised too, that it had taken losing 2 things he cared about in close succession to make him willing to sit still long, enough to look at himself honestly. He said the things he was learning were not comfortable. He said he was learning that he had spent most of his adult life being well-liked without being truly known, and that the performance of warmth had become such a habitual substitute for actual vulnerability that he had stopped being able to tell the difference, which meant the people who loved him could not tell the difference either, and that was not a fair thing to do to anyone. Camille listened to all of it. She listened the way she had listened at Fern, with the full and patient attention of a woman who respects the truth regardless of who is delivering it or how late it arrives. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she told him she was glad he was doing that work. She told him she meant that without reservation. She told him she hoped he would keep doing it, not because of what it might restore, but because of what it would allow him to become, and that she genuinely wished that for him. He looked at her for a long moment with something in his eyes that she recognized as the particular grief of a man who understands, for the first time with complete clarity, the full dimension of what he had in his hands before he let it go. He asked her if there was any version of a future in which they found their way back to each other. She had known the question was coming. She had prepared her answer not as a rejection, but as a truth. She told him that she had spent a long time making herself available for a version of love that required her to be less than she was, and that she had learned, at significant cost and with significant clarity, that she was not willing to do that again. She told him that the woman who had waited for him to choose her was a woman she had loved and learned from, and honored in the leaving. She told him she was someone else now, not a better version in the way that implied the previous version was inadequate, but a fuller version, one who knew her own value with a precision that made certain things impossible that had once been possible. She told him she wished him every good thing. She told him she meant it completely. He nodded slowly, the nod of a man receiving something he recognizes is true even though it is not what he came hoping to hear. He stood, he thanked her for seeing him. She walked him to the elevator and they said goodbye, with the quiet dignity of 2 people who had mattered to each other and were choosing to honor that mattering by letting it end cleanly. The elevator doors closed. She stood in the hallway for a moment. Then she walked back into her office and sat down and finished, reviewing her notes for the afternoon session. The documentary, titled Own Voice, premiered at the Atlanta Film Festival in October, 14 months after Camille had walked out of Fern Restaurant and 6 months after Vanessa. O.C. had called her on a Tuesday morning when the spring light was coming through her office window in a way that had seemed briefly and unreasonably hopeful. The premiere was held at a theater in Midtown on a Thursday evening, and the audience was the kind that a film about black women building something real in Atlanta naturally draws. Full and attentive and emotionally present in the way that community audiences are when they see their own lives reflected back at them with honesty and care. Camille sat in the fourth row with Tamara on her left and her mother on her right. Denise Jasper, retired schoolteacher from Decatur, who had watched her daughter navigate, 11 years old and fatherless and 26, and heartbroken and 34 and rebuilding, sat in that theater with her hands folded in her lap and watched her daughter's voice and face fill a screen in a way that the whole room leaned toward. At the moment in the film where Camille spoke about the difference between persistence and attachment, about confusing the two and the work of uncoupling them, Denise reached over in the dark and took her daughter's hand and held it without saying anything. Because some things are too large for words, and wise enough people know that. The film received a standing ovation. Vanessa took the stage with her crew and spoke about what the project had meant, about the women who had trusted her with their stories, about what it means to document a community in the act of becoming. When she called Camille to the stage, Camille walked up in a dress, the color of deep water, and stood in the light of the theater and looked out at the faces of people she had known for years and people she was meeting for the first time, and her mother in the fourth row and Tamara beside her. And she felt, with the full and undefended clarity of a woman who has arrived somewhere real, that this was what the other side of all of it looked like. Not the absence of pain, not the erasure of the 2 years or the waiting, or the dinner or the 6 minutes in the car. All of that was still true and still hers and still part of the architecture of who she had become. But underneath and beyond all of it, something that had been growing quietly in the cleared ground of a life honestly examined, something that looked unmistakably and at last like herself. She spoke for 4 minutes without notes. She thanked Vanessa and her team. She thanked the students of the media literacy program who were present in the audience, 17 of them seated together in the 7th row, including Amani, who had read her essay about her grandmother in the presence of a camera and had not flinched. She thanked her mother. She said the rest of what she needed to say with her eyes and her posture and the particular quality of stillness she had learned to inhabit, the stillness of a woman who is no longer fighting for a place at a table but has understood fully and finally that she is the one setting it. What she did next, what she had done in the months of rebuilding and the years of becoming and the decades of being her mother's daughter and her father's child and her community's faithful servant, had left everyone who witnessed it changed in ways they would spend years articulating, not because it was dramatic or unprecedented or the stuff of easy inspiration, but because it was true. And the truth, when a person has the courage to live inside it completely, has a way of becoming something other people can feel in their own bones long after the moment has passed. Marcus Delaney watched the premiere from the audience, 3 rows behind and to the left, having purchased a ticket through the festival's public sales. He had not told anyone he was coming. He sat in the dark and watched the woman he had not known how to keep build something extraordinary out of the space he had left behind, and he felt the full weight of that with a clarity and sobriety that no earlier version of himself would have been capable of sustaining. It did not make him a villain. It did not make him a lesson. It made him a man who had learned something important, too late to use it, where it would have mattered most, and who was learning, slowly and with the help of a patient therapist and an honest mirror, to build something real with what remained. Some things cannot be reclaimed. Some doors once walked through lead only forward, and the people who are brave enough to keep walking, who choose truth over comfort and growth over the familiar ache of what was, they do not always get to look back and find what they left waiting for them. Sometimes what they find instead is larger. Sometimes what they find is themselves. And sometimes that is the most extraordinary thing of all. If this story moved you, if it reached something real inside you, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Every single subscriber is a signal that these stories matter, that these voices deserve to be heard, and that the truth, told with care and intention, still has the power to change something in the people who receive it. Hit that subscribe button, leave a comment telling us what this story meant to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and turn on your notifications so you never miss what comes next. There are more stories where this one came from. Stories about real people, real choices, real consequences, and the extraordinary resilience of those who choose themselves. We will see you in the next one.